Hi there. What if much of what you've heard about retirement is just plain wrong? In this two-part series, I'm counting down the top 10 retirement myths that trip people up and busting each one with actual data from credible sources. And stick around because busting these myths can really impact your retirement planning, potentially saving you thousands or shifting your thoughts about how much you really need to save in retirement, perhaps less than you thought. In this two-part series, I'm going to debunk myths about savings, Social Security, healthcare, and more so you can retire confidently. So be sure to watch each myth and see it busted so you can plan better for retirement. And I'm not going to just give you opinions. I'm going to show you the facts to set the record straight. And I'll provide the sources in the description so you can check them out for yourself if you wish. And I think this video is so important. And the reason why I'm putting it into two parts is because there's just so much to talk about. And these myths are so common and you hear them all the time. So let's start with the first one, which is myth number 10, and you need $1 million to retire. A lot of people chase the idea of some magic number, and they usually go with $1 million for retirement. But you know what? Most retirees have nowhere near that amount of money. According to an article published on retirementliving.com, a Federal Reserve study reported that fewer than 5% of retired households have a million saved, and under 2% have 2 million saved. In fact, the median savings for Americans aged 65 to 74 is about 200,000, meaning half have less than that. Yet, many still retire comfortably by combining savings with Social Security or pensions. So, the truth is, the amount you need depends on a lot of things. It depends on your lifestyle, location, and income sources. It's not a one size fits all. Planning how you live in retirement is more important than blindly chasing an arbitrary dollar goal, and there is no one magic number that's going to work for everyone. It's highly individualized and depends upon factors like how and where you want to live in retirement. So you need to come up with a number that, quite frankly, works for you. A million might be great for some, but not enough for someone else. So don't be discouraged if you don't have a seven-figure nest egg. Focus on your own budget and your income plan. And many retirees make it work without hitting that mythical $1 million mark. So can you. Of course, no matter what your number is, it's important for it to be a solid nest egg. But what about taxes on that nest egg? And this leads us into myth number 9, which is you're going to pay much less in taxes once you retire. Now, that seems very logical, right? No paycheck, no big taxes. But unfortunately, retirement doesn't work that way. You don't automatically get put into an ultra low tax bracket. In fact, many retirees pay significant taxes, sometimes in surprising ways. For example, a lot of people don't realize that up to 85% of your Social Security benefits may be subject to federal income tax if your combined income, which includes your adjusted gross income, non taxable interest, and half of your Social Security benefits, exceeds 34K if you're single or 44K if you're married filing jointly in 2025. For single filers with combined income between 25K and 34K, or joint filers between 32K and 44K, up to 50% of benefits can be taxed. And benefits are not taxed if your combined income is below 25K for single filers or 32K for joint filers. So the reality is most middle income retirees end up paying tax on at least a portion of their Social Security benefits. And remember, when you fund your retirement from your 401ks or IRAs, those withdrawals are taxed as ordinary income, just like you were getting taxed when you were getting a paycheck. And if you're an early retiree withdrawing money from a taxable brokerage account, you're still going to pay long-term capital gains tax rates on assets you've held for more than a year. And if you pull money from assets you have had less than a year, you're going to pay short-term capital gains, which is taxed as ordinary income. And then on top of this, once you're in your 70s, required minimum distributions or RMDs from your 401ks or IRAs can push you into a higher tax bracket and dramatically increase your tax bill. And don't forget state taxes, property taxes, and sales taxes. Those don't magically disappear after you stop working. So you need to plan for taxes in retirement. Strategies like Roth conversions or tax efficient withdrawals can help manage your tax bite, but it's a myth and a huge mistake to think your taxes are going to be much less than when you were working. But what about other expenses being lower in retirement? Many assume their cost of living will plummet after they retire, and that leads us into myth number 8, which is your living expenses will drop dramatically in retirement. Now, you may have heard the rule of thumb that you'll only need 70 to 80% of your current income in retirement. But the reality is that many retirees find they spend nearly as much as before or sometimes more. Why? Well, costs associated with commuting to work, for example, may go down, but other expenses pop up. Travel, hobbies, and home projects can fill the gap. More importantly, healthcare costs tend to rise faster than inflation as we age, and healthcare costs can be a huge expense in retirement and are one of the top concerns for retirees in Schroeder's 2025 retirement study. And per a study done by Fidelity and reported in March, 57% of retirees say healthcare costs are higher than they had anticipated, nor had they planned for it. And if you retire early and need to get your own health insurance, that's a huge cost you have to plan for. Plus, if you live a long time and depending upon the age you retire, especially if you retire early, you could face decades of expenses with inflation gradually eroding purchasing power. The bottom line is don't assume a drastic spending drop in retirement. It's safer to budget for similar expenses as you have now while working and build a cushion for later years. As an early retiree myself, having retired last year at the age of 55, I can honestly say that our expenses have not decreased in retirement. The lifestyle you had pre retirement doesn't suddenly change just because you're retired. In fact, many retirees, including myself, actually see a spending spike in the early years of retirement, often called the go go years when they're still young and healthy enough to travel and be really active. So they spend more in those years, which is then followed by a lull and then possibly another uptick if healthcare or long term care costs arise. You may have seen or heard this called the retirement smile pattern for retirement spending. David Blanchett came up with this back in 2014. Speaking of expenses, many plan to rely on Social Security for the bulk of their income and to fund their expenses. Which brings us to myth number 7, a potentially really dangerous one. It's the myth that Social Security will fully cover your retirement needs. After paying into Social Security our entire working lives, it's easy to think those monthly checks are going to have you set. But huge reality check, Social Security was never meant to be a retiree's sole support. For the average retiree at 65, Social Security replaces only about 30% of their previous earnings per the National Council on Aging. Put another way, you're getting roughly a third of your old income. The rest you're going to have to fund yourself. Per Kiplinger in 2025, the average Social Security benefit for all retired workers is $1,976 per month and $3,089 for married couples that are both receiving benefits. And per the National Council on Aging, more than 1 in 3 tell researchers they ended up receiving less from Social Security than they expected while working. And remember, Social Security is subject to annual cost of living adjustments or COLAs, but that may not fully keep up with true inflation in your expenses, especially healthcare. The key takeaway here is to think of Social Security as a base income floor, but not your whole retirement plan. It's a critical supplement, but if you want to maintain your lifestyle, you're going to probably need personal savings or other income streams on top. Treat any estimate of your Social Security benefit as just one part of your retirement paycheck. And if you're worried Social Security won't even be there at all in the future, you're not alone. That's actually our next myth, and the truth might surprise you. This myth is Social Security will disappear by the time I retire. You've probably heard the doom and gloom headlines Social Security is going bankrupt. This myth causes a lot of anxiety. So let's bust it with the data. It's true that Social Security's trust fund has challenges. Per Kiplinger, starting around 2033, the program is projected to only have enough incoming tax revenue to pay about 77% of scheduled benefits. That means if nothing is done, benefits could be cut by 23%. However, Social Security is not going to vanish or run out to zero. Even in the worst case scenario, retirees are still going to receive the majority of their benefits per Kiplinger. In fact, Social Security is largely pay as you go, meaning current workers' payroll taxes fund current retirees' benefits. So as long as people are working, money is going to be flowing in. Now, Congress could act before 2033 to shore up the system as it did in the 80s, but even if they play chicken with that deadline, benefits are not just going to stop. So, worst case, checks might be similar if a fix isn't found, which is certainly an issue to plan for. But plan for a haircut, not a total loss. So don't write off Social Security in your financial plans. It's almost certainly going to be there in some form. Just stay informed of any reforms and maybe build in a contingency. For example, assume you might get maybe 75 to 80% of your full benefit in the distant future if you want to be extra conservative in your planning. All right, those were the first five myths, and already you can see how powerful it is to bust these with real facts. Were any of these myths ones you believed in and are now shattered? Or are some of them ones you used to have, like I did, but no longer believe in? Leave a comment. I'd love to hear from you. And we're just getting started. In part two, I'll tackle the final five myths, including a big one about Medicare, the truth about working longer, and the number one myth that holds people back from retiring early. And I totally do not believe in it really needs to be busted. And is something that I heard all the time before I retired. Until then, this is Mike Upland, early retiree at age 55. Thanks for watching this channel, Early Retirement Roadmap, and make the most of today.